Colonel, welcome back.
Hey, thanks very much.
We've seen a very strange response to the attack Hamas did on Israel back on October 7th here in the United States, where you see so many people up on Capitol Hill all the way up to the president's office and Joe Biden's team continuing to stump for war in Ukraine. You had the presidential debate on Wednesday night where people like Nikki Haley and Tim Scott were saying we needed to go back into Iraq and go into a full-on war with Iran. Doesn't seem like the temperature for doing anything of the same or supporting our friends over in Israel is resonating much up on Capitol Hill and even outside of the Beltway into major cities all across the United States. How are you seeing this whole thing shake out?
Well, if we're going to talk about the Israeli thing, I don't think the Israelis have much to worry about when it comes to Washington. They effectively own it. So they've got whatever they want. Frankly, Mr. Netanyahu exerts more influence and authority in Washington than Mr. Biden does. So they'll get whatever they need. The problem right now is that the Israelis, who are on the receiving end of this horribly barbaric attack, have sought to do more in response than I think they have in the past. I think they decided that this was an opportunity to settle accounts with all of Israel's enemies, potentially, because they could leverage our power. And so Gaza is now a couple of things. First, it's supposed to be an object lesson. In other words, if you go in there and you annihilate not just Hamas, but destroy the entire settlement and either kill or drive the population out, that's a signal to the rest of the region that Israel can do the same to them. Of course, that's not true. Israel can't, but it could with our help and assistance. The bad news with object lessons is that sometimes they backfire.
Right.
And I think this particular object lesson is backfiring. My concern is, first and foremost, two things. First of all, that our power and influence in the world not be degraded any further than it already has been by a series of stupid decisions on the part of the Biden administration and Congress. The most profoundly stupid one of all, of course, in Ukraine. That war has been lost. The Ukrainian nation is destroyed. Over 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers are dead. They've run out of essentially mobilizable manpower. So that's one catastrophe. The new catastrophe could be Israel's destruction. And I think this is something that is not appreciated or understood right now in the United States or Europe. The region is different today from what it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, when the Egyptians and the Syrians attacked Israel and the Israelis responded, the attack was a surprise, but it was not on the scale of the Hamas performance. In other words, it was not some ruthless campaign of extermination. The Egyptians, in fact, crossed the Suez Canal and effectively set up defenses because they knew they could not maneuver effectively against the Israelis. And the result was that the Israelis were defeated in their attempts to dislodge them until finally, towards the end of the conflict, they managed to break through and cross the Suez Canal. At the time, we had Nixon as president, and Nixon was happy to see the Israelis succeed, but he also wasn't going to allow the Israelis to go so far as to provoke a regional war.
Right.
And he knew that if he did not stop the Israelis, the Russians would probably come in, at that time the Soviets, to rescue the Egyptians from destruction. So he said stop. The Israelis eventually halted, pulled back across the Suez, and we know the rest of the story. We got a peace agreement out of it that has lasted for 50 years and done very well, frankly. That's all absent right now. You have no one who is essentially saying to the Israelis, you've probably done enough at this point. If you continue to kill more of these unarmed civilians, regardless of however much you may hate them and they may hate you, you risk today bringing together an alliance of virtually everyone in the region against you. And most important, Turkey, which at the time in 1973 was very secular and allied strongly with the West and pro-Israel, is not secular any longer. It's very much an Islamist state. And they can put 2 million men into the field in a month. They have a substantial navy. They have a substantial arsenal of missiles. And everyone is saying, oh, well, the Turks will never do anything. Well, the answer is no, the Turks will act. But they're waiting for us to act to restrain the Israelis before they do anything. And now we have something that we've never seen before. And that is the Turks and the Iranians are coordinating and cooperating.
Yep.
You had the Iranian foreign minister show up in Turkey, and he was greeted like the second coming, whereas Mr. Blinken was treated like the red-headed stepchild.
True story.
And so now he was then ushered in after his discussions with the foreign minister to see none other than President Erdogan. And since then, President Erdogan has met with the leader of Iran. The leader of Iran has now flown to Riyadh to see the crown prince to talk about the issue with the Saudis. What I'm trying to point out is that all of these states are more capable than they were 50 years ago. They have more technology at their disposal. They're better organized, better led than they were 50 years ago. And they're quite capable of coordinating their actions to really destroy Israel. The Israelis are no longer in a position to essentially act in a vacuum against what were previously incapable opponents. So this is a very dangerous situation. And my own view is that the president of the United States has an obligation to save Israel from itself. And they're doing nothing, regardless of what they say publicly. They're doing nothing. They don't know what to do. They've essentially opened the cage door and let out the tiger being Netanyahu. The tiger has decided that's it. We're putting an end to this once and for all. We're sympathetic to the tiger's position, but the problem is the tiger is ruthless, ravenous, and is killing everything in its path. That's unacceptable. We have gone into places like Bosnia and attacked the Serbs for ethnic cleansing. We've condemned people in Southeast Asia and Africa and worked against them because of ethnic cleansing. All of a sudden now we're witnessing exactly the same thing, and we are doing nothing. And people say, well, what could you do? Well, I'll tell you exactly what you could do. And this is what Nixon would do. He would say, either you stop or we withdraw our forces and suspend aid. That will get Mr. Netanyahu's attention immediately. And, you know, even though the Israelis are all horrified about what has happened, there are lots of Israelis who recognize that this is too much, too far. And it's dangerous for Israel now. The last thing we as an American state and republic want is a regional war in the Middle East. Let's talk about what happens if Biden and his friends continue to do nothing. Well, in addition to ending up in a warlike stance against Israel and us in the region, and believe me, the Iranians and the Turks can do a lot of damage to us, including our forces at sea, they'll shut down the Straits of Hormuz. Egypt will close the Suez Canal. Now, if you're prepared to pay $200 for a barrel of oil, then by all means, continue doing what you're doing. But I don't think we're prepared for that. And given the damage that these fools in Washington have done to our energy sector, $200 for a barrel of oil is absolutely catastrophic. So our financial position would collapse. We're now our debt servicing payment is now over $1 trillion a year. It's just jumped within the last couple of months. 2 months ago, it was equal to the cost of maintaining our national defense establishment. Now it's about 1.2, 1.3 trillion. This is insane. We can't afford this. And then, of course, against the backdrop of what? Stupidity in Ukraine. We provoked Russia. Russia was not the evil one as cast in this phony political drama in Washington. The Ukrainian regime, with our backing, had been killing Russians in eastern Ukraine for 8 years, over 14,000 of them. The Russians objected. We went through the Minsk agreement, travesty. Nothing happened. Nothing was done. In fact, things got worse. We armed the Ukrainians to the teeth and said, boys, go at it. We're with you all the way. And you can't lose because you have the scientific, industrial, and military power of the United States behind you. Well, didn't work out. They're crushed. And today, Russia is something it was not 2 years ago. It's incredibly strong and powerful. It's one of the leading military powers in the world. I wouldn't want to go to war with them at this point. They're far better positioned to fight us than we are to fight them. So all we have with this administration over the last 2 years is an unbroken record of catastrophic failure. And if this is not stopped in the Middle East, we could witness the end of Israel. Israel's not that large, gentlemen. It's not that big. There are a little over 6 million Jews inside Israel. You have 1.1 million Arabs inside that country. And there are millions of Palestinians everywhere, as we are discovering, including 1 million in Turkey.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean everybody's happy to have them, but it presents a problem. So the idea that you can go in now and essentially flatten Gaza in a scorched earth campaign and get away with it is no longer viable.